Hello, America. Thank you for joining me today on J Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. You know, it was about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, I saw a fantastic, fresh documentary that had hit the scene at the time called Enemies Within the Church. And to be honest, even though it was extremely interesting content, I didn't love it because it was exposing some people that I had respected for many, many years. And I had no idea the way that maybe their mind had been infiltrated and the denominational seminary they had gone to had been infiltrated by Marxist thinking. And I think subversion is the key word. A lot of these things creep in without people knowing it. And that includes, I think, some of the most well-known pastors of megachurches in America. So what I did was I contacted one of the filmmakers, Trevor Louden, who's an author, speaker, filmmaker, and he has studied communist infiltration into American politics, corporations, and most recently the church for over 30 years. And he was able to explain to me that these pastors that were exposed had been reached out to. So it's not like that they made the film and never asked their opinion, but they were ignored. And the film came under pretty heavy attack. I know Trevor was escorted off stage at one event just by showing, I think, the trailer. So I want to get an update on that today as far as what's happening in the American church and also touch on some hot topics in geopolitics. So with that, Trevor, I'm so glad to have you back. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, always a pleasure, Jeremy. Great to see you, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, let's start with a foundational thing that you touched on last time, but a lot of my audience may not know you. Why the interest in American politics, the church? Because New Zealand has problems of its own, right?
Well, it certainly does. But look, I was back in New Zealand in June. My dad's 90 years old, and we discussed World War II. And he was a little boy, and they were terrified of a Japanese invasion. You know, because our men were in North Africa fighting the Nazis. We were undefended. And if it hadn't been for the sacrifice of your fathers and grandfathers and uncles at Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea in Midway, I might not be here.
Mm.
We understand in New Zealand, as we do in Australia and many countries in Europe, that without America, we would be the victims. We would be controlled by China. The Soviet Union would have dominated Europe. America is the pillar of freedom in the world. If that pillar collapses, freedom is gone everywhere, and it won't come back for 1,000 years.
Mm.
So anybody who cares about liberty and has to care about America. And I'm here because we owe you one.
Well, that's a great reason.
More than one,
Yeah. Well, what would that have looked like, just out of curiosity, in New Zealand at the time? You got a small island just north of Australia, I believe. And you said you were worried about the Japanese.
East of Australia.
East of Australia.
Yeah.
Probably going to edit that part out.
Yeah.
But were you afraid of a direct attack or a direct infiltration of Japanese troops into New Zealand?
Well, New Zealand had Japanese submarines in its harbors.
Wow.
The Japanese are believed to have had invasion plans drawn up. The Japanese bombed Darwin in northern Australia, just destroyed that town. So there was real reason to fear. And they had swept down, they'd conquered the Philippines, they'd conquered Singapore, they'd conquered New Guinea, which is just straight to the north of Australia. Our sea routes would have been cut off. We would have been starved. We would have eventually gone under. It might not have been the very first priority for the Japanese, but they would have taken us at some point. And that where they would have been very cruel masters.
Right.
We know that from their behavior in some of the other places they conquered. So, yeah, there was a genuine terror, a genuine, real concern that we would face a military invasion.
Now, back in those times of the World War II era to today with Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkin, the most recent prime minister, it's taken a very socialist turn or even communist turn. How long has that been going on in New Zealand?
Well, look, New Zealand has been socialist since the 1890s. We were settled by the English nobility, the second sons of the English nobility, the ones who didn't inherit, so they had to go to the colonies and make their fortune, and the British tradesman class. And they came out when unionism was getting big in Britain. You know, a lot of them came to New Zealand because they were persecuted for their unionism in Britain. And so we always had that socialist drift. You know, we got socialized healthcare in the 50s.
Wow.
We got all of the liberal stuff that you see here, the gay marriage, all this kind of stuff. We got that long before you did. So we've always had that, but we from the 80s on, we had a relatively free economy. Economically, it wasn't too bad, but that's been clawed back in recent times, and the Chinese communists have huge influence in both of the main political parties in New Zealand. They're getting the conservatives through business, they're getting the left through ideology. And so we are moving very, very, well, not even slowly now, but very swiftly into the Chinese orbit.
You know, when I look at American cities, because we're a nation of states, and each state's got its own government. Each city even has its own government and county, all of that. So we're able to be fragmented in a sense where one part of the U.S. can be far to the left and one part can be fairly far to the right. There's not too many places that are heavy right anymore. But you know, I always think, how do people not get this? Everywhere in America, at least the cities and the states where it's heavy left and communistic in their philosophy, they tend to do poorly. I mean, I live in Tennessee, and every one of my neighbors that have moved in from elsewhere is coming from the West Coast, from California or Oregon or even New York. So it's not working out well. And you can see the homelessness in these big cities, and you see that they just are doing nonsensical things in the name of love or in the name of helping your neighbor or what have you, but it doesn't work. So in a place like New Zealand, where you're saying, I didn't know this, that since the 50s, you guys had socialist healthcare and other things that we're just now getting here. Has it worked out well in any capacity? Are there any leftist movements that are good?
Well, no, it isn't. Look, you know, and I grew up as a kid, you know, we got free milk in schools. My dad was working, but my mother still got a benefit for every child she had. Well, it was the welfare state. They used to call us the Albania of the South Pacific. We had 66% taxation. We had import controls. Our economy was starving, was being starved out. And they got to the point in 1984, a new government took over, and they opened the books, and we had enough money to pay the government bills for 3 days. So they slashed and burned. They privatized the railways. They cut the farm subsidies. The farmers went ballistic. But in 2 years, the economy was booming. You know, the farmers diversified from sheep and got into wine and venison and cattle and dairy and whatever. And things were really good. But that's slowly being clawed back now. We're getting each successive Labour government has got more and more socialist, more and more Marxist. And they're also playing the race card a lot with our native Maori population, which is about 15% of the population.
That's right out of the playbook. That's the Marxist playbook. They're doing it in every country.
Absolutely. Just like they do with the blacks, the Latinos in America. You find a minority, you boost up the grievances, you create a big sense of injustice, you slant the political levers of power in their favor, and you use them as a revolutionary force. You know, that's the communist playbook for America. That's the communist playbook for New Zealand as well. And it's sad because we once enjoyed some of the best race relations in the world.
Yes.
And they're still better than many, but nowhere near as good as they could be, that's for sure.
Yeah. You know, I feel the same about even in sports. Back when I was playing both college and professional baseball, I was with all races, and baseball is a very international game at this point, especially professionally, and all colors, all races from all over the world. And we got along so well. And there wasn't all of this, like you said, the boosted grievance. And that is what they've been able to accomplish. And I've been amazed in sports the way that everybody took a knee for Black Lives Matter. And now they're singing 2 national anthems at some football games. And it's just, it's insanity. And I'm amazed by it. Kind of like I'm amazed by the stuff in the church. I'm amazed at sports.
Yeah. Well, let's see, this is deliberate Marxist program. It's called the nationalities question. This came from Stalin and Mao, because they realized in the third world countries and places like America, the old class struggle didn't work. Because in America, you can start off dirt poor and end up filthy rich, or the other way around.
Right.
But so the class struggle never really worked here, but race is always with you. So, Black Lives Matter, that's a Chinese communist operation. It was never designed to reconcile races. It was designed to drive wedges. Now, you look at sport. Sport is dominated by Nike. Nike is completely in bed with communist China. That's why you get all this woke sport. Now, can you tell me that forcing people to take a knee and this kind of thing and worship this communist operation, Black Lives Matter, has improved race relations in the sporting field? Has it made
or
things
anywhere
better?
else? No.
No, it's because it's not meant to.
Right.
It's meant to divide. In New Zealand, they were agitated. The Communist Party in New Zealand was agitating for separate Maori republics as far back as the 1930s, separate Maori areas. Now the New Zealand government under Hipkins wants the Maoris about 15% of the population, but they want to give them 50% representation on government boards.
Which makes no sense. I mean,
well, not if you want good race relations. See, any family knows this. Any family with kids knows this. The surest way to destroy your family is to treat your children unequally. Treat them by different standards. Favor one and not the other. Give one a lot of pocket money, not the other. Be tough on one, easy on the other. You do that, you destroy your family. You want to destroy a country, treat your racial groups differently. You do that, it's a guaranteed destruction of the country.
What's interesting about that is when I look at the institutions and even the people that are way up at the top, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, or even the Joe Bidens, president of the United States or resident.
Resident, yeah. That's better.
Many times it's like these are all like old white guys, but they're pushing, these agendas to divide people based on race, et cetera, but they're not giving up their power. It just seems to be that they stay right in their seat of power.
Look, Black Lives Matter is not about helping black people. The transgender movement is not about helping sexually confused people. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. Find some people who are dispossessed or have a grievance, exaggerate that grievance, turn them into a pressure group, give them more power, and they become the revolutionary force for you. Just feed all these young black kids who now think that Republicans are racist and Trump was a Nazi. They can be channeled. They can be used in elections. They can be used to start riots. Right. If they think they're equal with everybody else and they've got a fair shot at the American dream, they're not going to go for this revolutionary stuff. But if they're fed victimhood from day one in their schools, on TV, in their culture, they're cannon fodder for the revolution.
Absolutely. And something, you'll know this principle well, but Thomas Sowell talked about it a lot. Freedom is hard. It's difficult to take complete responsibility for your own life. And as you said, in America, you could, now it would be tougher because the way things are going, but you could start from poverty basically and build yourself up to a very wealthy family and even have intergenerational wealth. I saw that happen in my own family, but it is hard. I just tried to start a small business over the last year and it looks like it's going to fail. And that kind of hurts my ego or pride or whatever. But what am I going to do? Am I going to say, oh, I'm a victim and this person did this to me or that to me? That's a sure way to failure and to remain a victim versus saying, I got to dust myself off. I've got to retool this thing and we'll go at it again. So telling somebody that they're a victim constantly, I think, is the quickest way to ensure their failure.
Look, absolutely. And that's the thing they want. The powers that be want permanent underclasses. They want a permanent criminal underclass, permanent racial underclasses so they can keep picking the scab, so they can just keep on making people angry. What is communism? Communism is the spirit of Cain. It's the spirit, freedom is the spirit of Abel, loyalty, diligence, hard work, God-fearingness. Communism is the spirit of Cain, jealousy, envy, resentment, rebellion.
Wow.
They
I've
got
never
to
heard that.
people. Yeah, well, they got to keep people in the spirit of Cain.
Hmm.
That jealousy, that resentment, that anger, that bitterness that drove Cain to do what he did to Abel. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's what we're playing out today. Communism is a spirit of Cain. The American system is a spirit of Abel.
That's
You know?
even the name Abel, it just,
Yeah, well, it is.
the
It
English
is.
meaning, I'm able.
Able people, you
Right,
know?
right. That's cool. I've never heard
You
that
know?
parallel. Well, I want to talk about now how this spirit has infected, and I'll just use my old church in Atlanta as an example. I went to North Point for probably 9 or 10 years of my life. I went down to Georgia Tech for college, and I was, a small Baptist church guy growing up, and then tried a few churches down there, and then went to Andy's church, and they had a great college ministry. And honestly, it took me a few Sundays to get used to that huge church kind of style, but I really liked the messages, and I began to bring my teammates, and it was a great place for me for several years there. And then I became a teacher of an apologetics class, when I got done with pro sports, and went back to Atlanta, and it was still, really, really good. But I did start to notice the way that they would talk about race, and the way that they would talk about the LGBTQ communities. It began to sound a little bit more like the world and a little bit more apologetic, slowly. But then when I saw the Enemies Within the Church film, and there were some just direct call outs, I don't know whether Andy was actually in that film or not. I think he was.
He was apologizing his grief for his whiteness, apologizing for his
right. And now we've got videos just in the last year since you came on my show last time. There's been, clips of him at these private events where he's speaking, and he's really raising the morality of the LGBTQ community over Christians, because he's like, look what they've had to deal with, what we've done to them. And if they're still coming to a church, they've got more faith than any one of you in this room. And I've been shocked and appalled. And then somebody sent something to me the other day he was a teammate of mine that went to North Point and was on my baseball team, but we both had the same feeling. And he sent me this little article where Andy's having I don't know the name of it, so I don't need to speak on what the name of the conference is, but he's having two gay married pastors that are there.
Right.
So I can't believe that he's really doubled down, even since a film like yours came out. You would think that he would kind of be like, well, maybe I should shut up on this for a while because people are becoming aware of what I'm doing.
Yeah, look, I think he's convicted by this stuff. Look, this is the culture that has crept into the Southern Baptists and many evangelical churches over the last 5 to 10 years. Because the stage was set in the early 2000s as the Marxists, through the Gospel Coalition and others, took over the Bible colleges and the seminaries. Well, this started way back even further, but the evangelical seminaries started to be infiltrated in the 70s, the Vietnam War era.
Right.
There's a lot of pastors a lot of left-wingers who didn't want to fight their communist brothers in Vietnam. They didn't want to get drafted to go and fight communism in Vietnam, so they took draft deferments and went to Bible college so they could promote socialism through the church. And so Andy Stanley has obviously imbibed this stuff. If you talk about racism, it's a very simple way to deal with racism. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. That's all you need to know about racism. If you do that every day, racism is not an issue, is it?
No,
you're treating people as they are, as individuals.
Right.
But when you got this obsession with race, you're putting people in categories. That's Marxist right from the start. Where in the Bible were races ever emphasized like that? When did Jesus ever talk about, well, you're going to evangelize that race, but don't worry about that race because, this race, is special. You don't worry about them. It was never about that. It was always individuals.
I think the only place that people would point to is they'd say, well, the Jewish people were considered the Israelites were God's chosen people. But then, at the foot of the cross, all the ground became level. We said there is no slave or Greek or Jew or Gentile. So that was kind of thrown out.
Yeah. So for Andy Stanley's to start talking about race like that, he is adopting Marxist ideas. If he's talking about the LGBT community, well, that's also a Marxist concept. The father of the modern, gay rights movement was Harry Hay, a very famous Communist Party member, recruited into the Communist Party, by the way, by his lover Will Gere, the actor, who some of you might remember as Grandpa Walton. So, but that's where it started. The Gay Liberation Front of the 70s was deliberately modeled off the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, the communists who were killing American soldiers in the field. And they openly talked about, this is not about gay marriage. This is bringing down the American system. Mm-hmm. The gay movement is a Marxist socialist movement. And if Andy Stanley is promoting that, he is promoting Marxism. Now, he would probably dispute that, but that's the harsh reality. See, what the woke church is, and he's woke as woke can be now. The woke church means you are awake to issues of class division. You are awake to issues of gay oppression. You're awake to issues of white privilege and critical race theory. You've been awakened to these injustices. Well, that comes from the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where they used to get people in a square, and they put them up with signs around their neck, and everybody would throw rocks at them because this man owned 2 pigs and everybody else only had 1. So he was a dirty capitalist. And this was to raise people's consciousness of class differences. We would call it brainwashing. They called it consciousness raising. Today we call it woke.
Right.
But that's what it is. It is Marxist brainwashing. And Andy Stanley has been brainwashed. And he's promoting that to look, I talked to a lady the other day whose son was at one of Andy Stanley's youth groups. And he said, I'm not going back there, Mum. I'm not going back to that because they tell us, all they do is tell me how racist I am and how privileged I am. And so he would refuse to go to the youth group of Andy Stanley's church because of the blatant indoctrination he was getting. This was only a couple of years ago.
I think with that church and Andy Stanley, it has to be a more recent phenomenon, because I don't remember that language at all back in the early 2000s, or even 2010 was kind of when I moved away from Atlanta. But I don't recall that. It's more of a recent phenomenon, it seems.
Yeah, it's 2015 onwards, really.
Okay.
Really, that's when it's really accelerated, because see, Campus Crusade for Christ crew has really been taken over in the last 10 years. InterVarsity's been taken over in the last 10 years. So these big Christian, youth organizations, they've gone woke in the last 10 years. So they're feeding now into the churches. Their people are becoming youth pastors and even pastors of churches. Like, for instance, InterVarsity held a big conference in 2015 in St. Louis, Missouri. There's about 3,000 or 4,000 kids there. And as the Midwest, they're mainly white kids. And the lecturer was Michelle Higgins, and a young black woman pastor from St. Louis, Missouri. And she harangued these kids on their white privilege. Mm. Their white privilege. They would have gone away thinking ending white privilege was the 11th commandment. That was all she talked about. Well, they weren't told that she was a member of the Organization for Black Struggle. That is the group that burnt Ferguson, Missouri to the ground in 2014. Mm-hmm. It is a front for Liberation Road, the pro-Chinese American Communist Party. She was giving them straight Chinese propaganda. And these kids are thinking, wow, this is a new way of looking at Christianity.
Right. What's amazing to me is like that story you just told. These things are not hidden. I mean, a couple internet searches, you can find out who is financing who and what the philosophy is of these organizations. So for someone like Andy or any number of the pastors and seminaries to be captured by this ideology. It seems insane to me. It just seems like they just gave up the fight and they said, let's just join hands because we can't actually defeat this ideology. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to have dominion over the earth and everything in it. We're supposed to dominate, and they have given that up. They have just abandoned it. Okay, we're going to adapt to the culture. The culture is left wing. We're going to be more left wing than the left wingers. That's really their attitude.
Yeah,
we are the culture is going left. The country's getting browner. We got to be more pro brown and more pro left. This is their thinking. I'm not saying
right, yeah.
my analysis, but I don't see people in these terms. But that's how they see them, because they have adopted, to at least some degree, this Marxist thinking. They've pretty much abandoned the Old Testament, a lot of them as well.
Right.
That's pretty much gone. They have it's all about love, but their love is a very shallow form of love, because any family will know that you have two kinds of love in a family or a church. You got the feminine love who will nurture you and look after you and welcome you, and the love of the mother who will bandage your knee and read you nursery rhymes. But there's also the love of the father who will boot your little backside if you disrespect your mother.
Yeah.
Who will take his son to the ball game or out fishing or to the woodshed when necessary. That masculine kind of love, that onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, has been pretty much abandoned in most of the churches in favor of a very feminized type of love. The archetypal wispy-bearded, skinny-jeaned youth pastor, who drinks lots of coffees, but he wouldn't know the Old Testament. He wouldn't know anything out of the Old Testament, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I think what they're saying these days is the Old Testament it's not useful or relevant for our culture today, so they just try to not touch it.
Well, Andy Stanley says you're not bound by the sexual morality of the Old Testament. Well, why? Where does it say? Where does it say when Jesus came, well, I'm here to jettison the Old Testament? When did Jesus say, I'm here to abandon the law of Moses, I'm here to abandon all of that? He said, I am come to build on it.
Yes.
Didn't
he say not one letter of the law will drop before this temple is rebuilt, right?
Exactly. The law. The law comes before love. The Old Testament was there to tell us what the laws were, how to run things, how to run cities, how to run families, how to deal with one another. And Jesus came to build on that, to bring a whole thing. But he didn't come to abandon it. He came to build on its foundations.
I agree. What do you say? And this has always been a thing, when I go back to Leviticus or different books of the Old Testament, I'll read, and you'll read some very harsh passages, which seem to be some law, like, if the child continually disrespects, I think there was a thing about even stoning the child. I would not agree with that if that happened in my neighborhood, So what do you do with those passages?
Well, you got to look, I don't know. I'm not enough of a scholar to say. There are things in there that were product of the time when that kind of law was very much accepted. People got hung, tortured, drawn and quartered. That was a normal thing that kings did to their enemies. Mm-hmm. So as we have established more civilization and more actual better legal structures, and we've got a constitutional republic now, rather than an emperor or a king. The people are sovereign in America, right? Mm-hmm. Not the king.
Right.
So kings had to be a lot harsher to keep their people rulers. We can determine other rulers. We can society. See, I don't condone stone. I don't condone. Christianity has undergone reformation. Christianity has undergone reformations and changes. archaic practices, look at archaic practices in history that was there, that the law is paramount, and you will be blessed. You disobey God's law, you're blessed. You disobey God's whether you or you just have no the degree of punishment may be lessened. Principle remains.
Right.
I don't agree.
Right.
I don't agree. If somebody commits adultery in a marriage, they should be losing, and they should be losing property. They should maybe be owned,
right,
but they should be stoned,
right.
But
the spirit of the law still stands, and it seems like what the Marxists are doing, or they're actually approving the disobedience, where, like, the adultery, LGBTQ, all, like, we celebrate all of it, so it's it's running in the opposite direction.
That's it. I don't believe in stoning homosexuals, but I don't also believe in saying what you're doing is right. It's condoned by God, and it's not going to interfere with your salvation in any way, shape, or form. That's a lie. Right. That is a lie. And we make a point in the movie. There was Bobby Lopez, for instance. He was a guy who had lived a homosexual lifestyle. He came to Christ. He changed. He was married, had children. He said, I changed my life, but now the church is telling me I shouldn't have changed. I should have kept going in that lifestyle. I'm happier now. I'm much better off than I was. I was living a terrible life, but the church is condoning that lifestyle now.
Yeah.
And when he tried to raise that and tried to give his testimony in the Baptist church, he was basically fired. They wanted a gay-friendly Christianity.
Yeah, it's extremely unfortunate. Let's talk about the film for a minute. So it's been out for over a year now. Has it gained more traction? Where has it had the biggest splash in the time since it came out?
Well, Kerry Gordon, the pastor, is getting letters all the time. About 30% of them are negative. About 70% are positive. Thank you for saying what you've said. I've got to get more active. I've got to be a lot of letters from pastors, because the message is a big message to pastors. Their pastors are supposed to be leading their churches. They're not supposed to be there as entertainers or running a social club. A pastor is a shepherd. He has a crook, which is to keep discipline the flock and to beat the wolves away. And pastors are seeing that that's the role they need to take. They need to be leaders in their communities. And so, it's selling very well. We've got it out there in Portuguese, I believe. It's selling around Brazil now. We're getting a lot of feedback continuously, all the time. Everywhere I go, people have seen it. They're commenting on it. We got a bit of pushback from the start, but when that boosted sales, they tended to stop pushing back. They tended to stop giving us any oxygen, because the more they push back, the more we sold.
Are there any American church institutions, seminaries, or something major like Southern Baptist Convention? I know that they're probably not a fan, but are there other conventions that have said, "Hey, we agree with this. We're standing behind you"?
No, not conventions as such, but I know the Southern Baptists have lost a lot of members. The Southern Baptist Convention, a lot of churches have just said, we're not going to be part of this anymore. Right. We'll go independent or form a smaller federation. So that is a very big trend, very big. No, my view is the bigger the denomination, the more corrupt it tends to be, and the more difficult it is to realign itself. It's this where we're seeing the most feedback are from the home churches, the small churches, the independent churches. That's where the real fire is. Yeah, that's by far. The big denominations are pretty much a waste of time.
It's almost like big
Not,
government.
yeah, it's exactly the same principle.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. This country's not going to be saved by our current religious leadership any more than it's going to be saved by our current political leadership. It's going to be saved by grassroots Christians, grassroots patriots who have a fire in their belly to save their faith and save their country. That's what's going to save America. If our leaders were going to save us, they wouldn't have let us get in the mess we're in now.
All right. And well, it doesn't look like they're even trying. You talk about China a lot and the ideologies that they promote, but our own president is in bed with China. I mean, we know the kind of deals and money that he's getting from there, and he doesn't want to pull away from their influence.
Look, Joe Biden has been working in the interests of the Chinese since at least 2001. So we're talking over 20 years. Before that, he was working in the interests in the Soviet Union and Iran. Joe Biden is completely owned by our enemies, which is why he gave Afghanistan to China, which is why we're no longer energy independent, why he sold half of our oil, he's run down half of our military oil reserves, including selling some of it to China, then going begging to Iran and Venezuela to make up the difference. It is why he's allowing China to basically buy and steal anything they want in this country, and why the military is being constantly downgraded. If Joe Biden was a fully conscious Chinese agent here to destroy the American middle class, wreck the military, and wreck the economy so that the Chinese could attack and conquer us more easily, what would he be doing differently than he is today?
No, I guess nothing.
Look, the first thing here's an example. The first thing he did in office was to cancel the Keystone Pipeline, right?
Right.
Because Native Americans were protesting in the Dakotas. Well, those protests were organized by Judith LeBlanc of the Communist Party USA, which is loyal to China and to Putin's Russia. So then Judith LeBlanc is allowed to nominate her very good friend, Deb Haaland, a second-term congresswoman from New Mexico who no one had ever heard of, to U.S. Secretary of the Interior. Judith LeBlanc ran a political campaign. They had buses, Deb for Interior, because no one had heard of this woman. And so they got celebrity endorsements like Alyssa Milano, Mark Ruffalo, Sarah Silverman, Hanoi Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, Cher. They got her nominated. She is now Secretary of the Interior. She is a Marxist, and she is cancelling every single energy lease on public land she possibly can. She oversees 20% of America, and she's shutting down uranium mining. She's shutting down energy extraction. She's shutting down fracking everywhere she can. Right when we need the energy more than ever, she is starving us because she was put in place by an agent of China and Russia into that position. And what do you expect her to do? Right the other day, she was with Joe Biden, Deb Haaland, signing an agreement to stop uranium mining in a whole section of northern Colorado near the Grand Canyon. All this uranium that we need, for nuclear power plants, for nuclear weapons. We can't mine it anymore because they've shut it all down. That's what happens when your enemies get inside your house.
Yes. Well, let's talk about one of the enemies real quick. And, we may have a bit of a disagreement on this one, but, we need our energy. We need our money. And we're not just putting millions of dollars into the Ukraine. It's like hundreds of billions, and it just keeps going and going. And the American people are kind of sick of it. And when I say the American people, I mean patriots that don't buy into a lot of the same things you and I don't buy into, the whole COVID scam and all of that. It feels like Ukraine is the same thing where it's a big money dump to protect these globalist entities. And if you translate some Putin speeches recently, he's speaking against the LGBTQ takeovers, and he's speaking against all the racial stuff. So he's actually not sounding woke. Whereas it's just strange to hear you say the things you say, and then it's like, but we're going to support the same thing Alyssa Milano and Joe Biden would be supporting.
Well, this is what I would say. I in no way endorse the way Joe Biden is running this, but I do absolutely support the right of the Ukrainian people to defend their sovereignty. And I want to add a couple of things there. Now, Joe Biden invited the invasion. He said to Putin, a limited incursion into Ukraine would not warrant an American response. That was the green light. He could have said to Putin, if you put one foot in Ukraine, Mr. Putin, we're going to open up the energy fields in America. We are going to flood the world with oil. That's going to help Americans, it's going to help Europe, and it's going to drive you bankrupt. Instead, he has deliberately choked the supply of oil, which has driven the world price up, which is funding Putin's war. The very first thing that Biden gave to Ukraine was pistol ammunition after weeks of, look, we got to understand this too. Here's another thing. When Ukraine became independent, they had 800 nuclear weapons on their soil. Some people say 1,200. Bill Clinton forced them to give them all back to Russia on the rock solid guarantee of American protection against Russian aggression. The Russian government signed a rock solid treaty guaranteeing if they got those weapons back, they would never invade Ukrainian territory. We forget about that agreement. That's an agreement our country made to protect that country. Look, Trump gave the Ukrainians all sorts of weaponry. He was their big friend. Now, this is the most important thing, though. For 25 years, the Russian government, the KGB, has run a massive disinformation campaign to convince American Christians and conservatives that Putin is one of us, that Putin is our man. He's going to save us from George Soros. He's going to save us from the Muslims. He's going to save us from the radical gay agenda. Okay, so Putin's this big Christian, right? He goes to Orthodox churches. He makes these speeches specifically designed to Western conservatives. He did a conference in 2017. He had 30,000 kids from all over the world at this conference. He organized it. He keynoted it. He told these kids, the future is yours, go for it. Was this a Christian conference? This was the World Federation of Democratic Youth. This was a communist conference. These were 30,000 young communists from all over the world there to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. In the occupied territories of Ukraine, they're putting up the Lenin statues. The Lenin statues are going back up. The Russian tanks are flying red flags. The Donetsk and the Luhansk are now Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic with Soviet iconography on their flags. Putin is directly allied to Xi Jinping. They did the world's greatest military exercise in 2018, Zapad 18, the biggest exercise in world history, all about a nuclear attack on the United States. But Putin, the propaganda, has basically flooded America with the idea that Ukraine is hopelessly corrupt. It's run by Nazis, even though they have a Jewish president.
Jewish in name,
ethnically Jewish. But here's the hundreds of billions of things. The money that's actually gone to Ukraine is $23 billion worth of equipment, not money, equipment. 17 billion has been delivered. 6 billion more is underway. 23 more billion has been approved, but not even under production yet. So the actual figure that's gone to Ukraine is 17 billion.
Okay, I've read different things on this, but
absolutely. But the Russians are flooding the internet with every bit of propaganda you can to confuse, because they understand that American conservatives and Christians are their worst enemy, are the worst enemy of a totalitarian state. So they have to convince American Christians and conservatives that they are no longer totalitarian and that Ukraine is. And Ukraine is part of the World Economic Forum, whatever. Look, Putin was one of the very first young global leaders.
Yeah. Well,
He is
but so was Ron DeSantis. I mean,
well, yeah, but I'm talking 25 years. I'm talking. Ron DeSantis has been once. President Trump's been there once.
right.
But Putin has had a 25-year relationship with Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab has a bust of Lenin in his office. It is, our enemies are the governments of Russia, the government of China. Look, there are four great communist powers in the world. There's the Biden administration, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, Russia, and China. They are all communist, but they've got a lot of Americans thinking, no, Russia's on our side. Russia's not on our side.
It's hard for me to know who to trust.
Look, what I've just said goes completely against the narrative that millions of Americans now accept. And you hear it from Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon every day.
We're tired of being propagandized, and we feel like we can't trust our own government. So when someone like you, who I know is a freedom fighter, and I know that you are about the spirit of our Constitution, it's hard to hear it coming when what you're saying does align, at least in the who we're giving money to, with the Biden administration, that I just can't trust at all.
Well, see, this is my argument, though. The Biden administration is not really helping Ukraine. They have delayed everything they can. This is what they're doing. They're stringing the war out, not giving them enough to win, and it's drawing down our weaponry. That's true. It's reducing our stocks. And in election year, if Ukraine wins, they will take all of the credit. And if Ukraine loses, they will blame the Republicans.
Yes.
And you'll be seeing mass slaughter going on. See, look, Biden has delayed everything he can. He says, I'm for Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. As I said, the first shipment was pistol ammunition. He has delayed everything he can, because he's under pressure to help them. Even some of his own base want to help them, but he is not their friend. He's been Moscow's boy since 1972. His sanctions have actually helped Russia improve their economy.
I mean, behind closed doors, do you think it's possible that, I think Zelensky's a total puppet, former actor, but, that whole thing. But between Putin, Zelensky, the World Economic Forum, China, behind closed doors when nobody can see, are they all shaking hands, just agreeing like, okay, we're going to keep this war going. It's going to help with depopulation. It's going to help with America weakening itself over time with the loss of money. And we can, furthering that agenda of the one world government. I mean, is that?
I think it is largely. I do think Zelensky is a genuine patriot. I do think the Ukrainians have they are genuinely trying to save themselves. But America, the Biden administration is not genuine in helping them.
Okay.
They have their own agenda. The Chinese and the Russians have their own agenda. The World Economic Forum has its own agenda. The people of Ukraine, I would say, they should be the natural allies of the Trump base. They are fighting a communist regime. They threw off a Russian government. They are fighting for their survival. Look, if Vladimir Zelensky was the corrupt person everybody says he is, why has he not taken all his ill-gotten gains and got out of the country? Why is he staying in the country under constant threat of assassination, fighting with his people? Why does he have a 93% approval rating amongst his own people? They know him better than we do.
Maybe so. I just think propaganda is everywhere. I'm not convinced, but I
wouldn't expect
I trust your research. But there's things I could bring up. I get videos all the time of big parties going on in Kiev, and is this really a war zone? Like, what's going on here? And you got to admit, early on, there were a lot of fake pictures that were made by our media in order to make the Ukrainians, look like they were war heroes and and then you come to find out, wait, they're holding cardboard guns in some of these photos. Like, why are they doing this?
Look, there's propaganda on every side, but the Russians have the world's biggest propaganda machine. Like, there was a little, some of it's super crude. Like, there was a little video out there a while back interviewing a Russian guy saying, we found where the Ukrainians had been torturing children and extracting blood from them, and is speaking in Russian. Well, he has a hammer and sickle on his thing. This was a 1983 Russian soldier being talked to, but it's all over the internet,
Yeah, I've not
as
seen
though
that.
it was real today. Look, like initially it was black and white for a lot of people. Big country invades little country, very clear who's in the right or wrong. But the amount of propaganda that's come out there now has got a lot of people doubting that narrative.
Yeah.
And then you look at the fact that we all hate Biden, and Biden pretends to be helping them. Well, we don't want to be on the same side as Biden. But look, here's what'll happen. This is what I believe was supposed to happen. Ukraine was supposed to fall in a week. China was going to attack Taiwan. Iran was going to attack Israel. North Korea was going to attack South Korea. And we would have had a massive wave of saboteurs coming across our southern border and major problems in the United States. It would have all happened at once. But by miracles of God and by the bravery of the Ukrainian people, they held it up. They made Xi Jinping think twice. And so actually, by supporting Ukraine, I believe is the only way to stop World War III, because World War III was already planned.
Yeah.
That's my philosophy on that.
Let's end on a note looking forward. You mentioned early in the show about, hey, if America falls, we won't have the kind of freedom we've experienced for 1,000 years. And a lot of American Christians, based on their theology, their beliefs, they'd say, well, we kind of know what's going to happen. There's going to be a one world government, one world currency. It's going to be controlled. This goes back to the rapture ideology and 7 years of tribulation and then a true second coming of Christ. Trevor, I know you're not like a theologian, I don't believe, but at the same time, you've studied these things. What do you see as the future and where Christians are supposed to interpose in all these things?
That's a fantastic question. Look, okay, we know the world's going to end one day. We know Jesus will return one day, but he didn't know when that was going to be. And I think, when was it Abraham negotiated with God over the fate of Lot?
Over the fate of the city, I believe.
The city, yeah. If I can find 10 righteous men, if I can find, the point is God is flexible, okay? God looks at what we're doing and decides, I believe, whether to speed up the timeline or hold it back a little bit. But this is what I say. We're told to occupy till he comes, Civil government, the leadership, America is the country that's done more to spread the gospel, has done more to save people from tyranny, has done more to build hospitals and bridges and things than any other country in the world. It's done more good in the world than any other country. We've got a constitution inspired directly out of the Bible. This is the example for all other countries in the world. I don't believe God wants that lost. And this is what I say. All these people who think they're going to get raptured before it gets too bad. I just saw Christians in Iraq slaughtered to the last man by ISIS. Churches burned, people tortured, slaughtered in the most horrible way. I didn't see any of them get raptured. None. Mm-hmm. But American Christians who, through their slackness and laziness, have allowed this country to get the state it has, which has encouraged ISIS, which has encouraged these evil people. They believe they're going to be spared all of this and going to be taken up into the clouds before any of this happens, because clearly God loves American Christians more than he loves Iraqi Christians, right? That's the message there. Mm-hmm. So look, we are civil government, the governance of the country, that's biblical. Anybody who's read the Old Testament knows it's all about kings, it's all about government, it's all about what happens if you don't put a wall around your city. The Israelites found that one out. It's about national security. We have a responsibility to fight evil and protect our families to the very last moment. People who believe in the rapture, and they say that's an excuse for not doing anything to help the country. I say, well, at what point are you going to stop paying your mortgage? At what point are you going to stop mowing your lawn? And at what point are you going to stop changing your underwear? There is no point.
Right.
To the last second, we are supposed to be working. We are supposed to be combating evil. Anybody who says, I'm going to modify my behavior because of my reading of the Bible and I decide when Jesus is coming back, is being a totally irresponsible. We are told to occupy till he comes, and only God knows when that's going to be. We don't get to throw off our family responsibilities. We don't get to throw off our business responsibilities. And we don't get to throw off our political and civic responsibilities either because of our interpretation of God's timeline. That is the height of arrogance and the height of irresponsibility, in my opinion.
I agree with that. Gosh, I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you, but we've already gone an hour. So
I'm happy. I don't care.
Well, I'll ask one more then. Is there a time, because I don't, like I said many times, I do not trust our federal government at all. You mentioned the machines came into play in New Zealand with I believe Jacinda Ardern being elected. Well, they've definitely come into play in the United States, and I think that any institution or group of people with the mentality that you can mutilate children and call it care would happily steal an election and call it democracy. So for the American church to band together and say, we're all going to vote this time. We hadn't been voting, because that's what you always hear. We've all got to do our part and vote. Well, that's fine. But if you're voting with that corrupt of institutional leaders that are willing to steal the election, is there a time for revolution, for revolt, for something other than trying to do it, play by all the rules?
Look, if you look at it morally, yes, there is. There's always a time, obedience to, when government forbids that which God demands and government demands that which God forbids. There's a time. I would say we're past that time, and the fact that if we had a violent revolution in this country, and I do not advocate that at all, we would have Russia and China pouncing on this country before it's not just going to be America. They would seize that as a time to take us down. I think we're going to need some divine providence to get out of this, but all of us have to work peacefully as long as we can in elections, in civil government, in school boards. Look, the message of David versus Goliath, the message of Gideon's army, you don't need a big army. You need enough. You need enough godly people standing in faith and courage, and God may just well decide this country does deserve some providence, does deserve some help. You saw that in the American Revolution. There's no way that your founding fathers should have ever won that.
Right.
A bunch of farmers with squirrel rifles up against the world's greatest military machine. And you saw that famous fog that came down on New York Harbor just at the right time to save George Washington's troops. And there was many miracles. But the point is this: miracles happen when people stand up in faith and courage. Miracles don't happen to sniveling, cowardly wimps. Miracles happen to people who stand in faith and courage, because courage shows God that you have faith. Courage is proof of faith. You can say you're faithful, but when you actually put your life on the line, or put your business on the line, or put yourself out there, that's proof. And if enough people do that, I think we're going to get some divine help to get through this mess. I think that's the only way through. We got to play our part.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great message. It's a great spot to close it out. I want you to tell my viewers where they can find you. I know we've got trevorlouden.com on the screen, but are you still doing the show with Epoch Times?
No, I've got my own show now. It's called the Trevor Louden Report.
Okay. Just
look up Trevor Louden Report. My books, My Enemies Within the Church movie. My books, I've got a series on exposing the communist senators, another one exposing the communist congressmen, security risk senators, House Un-Americans. You can get them on Amazon, but if you want signed copies, go directly to trevorlouden.com.
Excellent.
Trevor, and it's Loudon, not En.
You should have told me that before the
by
show.
the way, I didn't even notice till now, until I just looked.
I'll tell you what, for those that are hearing this part, I'm going to go in and change that and superimpose it so it's right, but we'll get that fixed.
Yeah, well, I don't mind, but it's just trevorlouden.com, Loudon. But look, it's been a real pleasure, Jeremy.
Yes.
It's been fun.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to having you back sometime.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.